Okay, so hopefully you can hear me now. Um, Been a bit stressful. YouTube is not behaving itself. Um, so hopefully you're able to hear me. And there's no one on yet. So hello, good evening. Welcome to slightly late history time. Um, so I'm a bit stressed, kind of calm myself down. I'm wondering whether you can hear or not. The microphone is working on another app. Oh, great. Thank you, Vinny. Thank you and welcome. A bit relieved because I came on about 10 minutes ago and nobody could hear me. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dennis. Now I have to calm down and think of my questions. Um, yeah, the computers are great, but when they don't work, it's a bit of a nightmare. It's a bit of a nightmare. So, welcome to another history time, another question and answer session. So anyone is listening, feel free to write in a question. I have a fair few already. And I hope the weather is better where you are than it is here. Um, it's not very Septemberish, it's more Novemberish. Like the wind has been very fierce here in Kerry and Valencia. I'm doing a walk in the morning with a big number of people because they were supposed to go to the Skelligs, but that's cancelled. So there's a little bit of sun in the morning. So hopefully I'll bring these people for a walk and escape the mad rain because in the afternoon it's going to pour rain and I have to bring my daughter to a football match, which involves going over the mountains. Oh, so tomorrow's going to be a mad day. Anyway, on with the questions. On with the questions. Let's talk about history. Um, First of all, I'm not sure if it was last week. Um, I got asked a question about the McCarthy's. So I'm going to talk a bit about the McCarthy's today, um, specifically the McCarthy's in the 1590s and the Nine Years' War. Um, Anyone from Cork or Kerry knows there's lots of McCarthy's here. So if you can imagine 400 years ago, when Gaelic Ireland still existed, there were lots and lots of different McCarthy's. There were four main McCarthy lordships. The main one was McCarthy Moor, which covered bits of Killarney, Killorglin sometimes. Killorglin moved between the McCarthys and the Fitzgeralds of Desmond. Uh, there is the remnants of a castle in Killorglin. If you know Killorglin, when you go through the bridge, sort of, and you're on the Glenbeigh side, you're going up that big hill. There's a pub on your right. It's behind there. Castle Conway was called. So Killorglin was the frontier between the the lordship of Desmond or the lordship of the McCarthy Moors and the Earl of Desmond, the Fitzgeralds. And McCarthy Moors held, as I said, all of Evora plus Beara plus a few other bits. Um, and after them, you had McCarthy Ray, which is Carbery in Cork, a bit of, I think it's basically West Cork, and Muskerry. And then a third one, slightly newer, was Duhallow. So the McCarthys were very, especially McCarthy Moore, they were very powerful. Um, and in the 1590s, Cork and Kerry are the nearest parts of Ireland to Spain. Hugh O'Neill, he made the Nine Years' War dependent on aid from Spain. The English were really, really frightened of the Spanish arriving because they knew the chance, they knew what was going on, they knew how weak they were and how dangerous the Spanish intervention was. The problem for O'Neill was that the Spanish were overstretched. Like they were fighting the Turks, they were fighting the French, they were fighting the Dutch, and from 1580 on, they were fighting the English as well. And they also took over Portugal. And so the Dutch revolt started in the 1570s, and it became, in a way, the first big international war, the first World War, if you like, because the Dutch rebelled against the Spanish, and began to attack the Spanish and after 1580s Portuguese colonies in South America. They captured bits of Brazil at various stages, 1625 and then the 1640s. They captured various places in Africa. I know they attacked Angola, for example. In Asia, the Dutch went out there. Eventually, they would set up in what's now Indonesia. So you had fighting going all over the place. O'Neill expected, he was promised aid from Spain, and the obvious place for them to land would have been Cork or Kerry. McCarthy More holding Beara and Yverdon, that land was therefore very, very important. And if you throw in Muskerry, Carbery, and Duhallow, you have a huge chunk of the southwest of Ireland, which would be great for any Spanish force landing. Unfortunately for O'Neill, Donald McCarthy More, who was also the first Earl of Cloncaird, he died in 1596. He was a character. He was quite able to jump from one side to another. He also was in debt, so he would mortgage off parts of his land, especially to people who would later become, I think, the family of the Earl of Kenmare, Valentine Brown. So Valentine Brown expected to get a huge amount of McCarthy More's land, but then McCarthy More pulled a fast one. His heir was called Tig. He was the Baron Valentia, but he died a fair few years before. So McCarthy More had no official heir. He had a daughter, and the daughter married Fineen or Florence McCarthy, who was from the McCarthy Rays. And then Florence claimed the McCarthy More lordship. He had one main rival, which was also called Donald McCarthy. He was the illegitimate son of Donald McCarthy More. Unfortunately for Hugh O'Neill, Florence O'Neill won the struggle because he got support from O'Sullivan More. And O'Sullivan More, he was the one who would hand over the rod of lordship, Slot Tiernas, at the inauguration of McCarthy More. So he had the power to deny or grant legitimacy to McCarthy More lordship. And Hugh O'Neill was inclined originally to support the illegitimate Donald McCarthy, but O'Sullivan More wouldn't. So O'Neill was forced to support Florence McCarthy. Florence McCarthy he tried to keep on both sides, Hugh O'Neill's side and the English side, but he was ultimately outwitted by Carew, the Lord President of Munster. So he ended up doing nothing, which neutralized a lot of the advantage. If he'd been a better leader, he would have offered a lot of support to Hugh O'Neill. His illegitimate son in the end would offer support. But the fact is, Florence McCarthy made himself McCarthy More and then did nothing. So the main body of McCarthys were sort of spent the war sitting on the wall, doing nothing. The same goes from Muskerry and Carbery most of the time. The main guy in Muskerry was Cormac MacDermot. He was a political survivor. He's immortalized now in the legend of Blarney. Queen Elizabeth is supposed to have said, "This guy speaks nothing but Blarney." I'm 99% sure she didn't say this, but Cormac MacDermot he mainly supported the English, though his brother at times fought with O'Neill. He stayed on the English side throughout the war. In fact, he turned up at the Battle of Kinsale and attacked the Spanish there at one stage. After the Battle of Kinsale in the last bloody year in Munster, he stayed on the English side most of the time. However, around May, June 1602, a Spanish ship with guns and a lot of money landed in Tusist, which is in Beara, but it's part of County Kerry. So it landed, and suddenly there was a lot of Spanish gold going around, which caused chaos for a month or so. And a lot of McCarthy's and a lot of other lords got some of this money. And Carew, who was in charge of the English in Munster at that stage, he became somewhat paranoid. And he had never liked Cormac MacDermot, the Lord of Muskerry. And then one of Cormac MacDermot's cousins informed him, invented some sort of stupid tale. Cormac MacDermot was arrested, which caused chaos because he had several castles. So he then escaped and rebelled a little, but because he was so important, he managed to escape the chaos and was forgiven. The McCarthy Rays were mostly on the English side, although Florence McCarthy was the McCarthy Ray and was the Taoiseach to the McCarthy Ray lordship. They didn't. I think his uncle was the McCarthy Ray, but they didn't seem to like each other. So the McCarthy Rays didn't do much. However, so you had the Battle of Kinsale, which is at the very end of 1601. And then for the 1602, there's a lot of fighting in Munster. And for a while, one of the most important leaders in Munster was a guy called Dermot Maile McCarthy, who was the brother of Florence. Florence had been arrested. He was arrested about a year before. Dermot Maile seems to have been a much more effective soldier and leader than Florence. And he was doing a lot of good for Hugh O'Neill's cause, for the cause of O'Sullivan Bear, etc. at that stage. However, one day, I think it was in June, he went looking for some provisions. And he went to the land of one of his cousins, McCarthy Ray, and there was a fight broke out and he got shot dead. There's different versions of it, but it seems that like his man, one of the people guarding the cattle, thought he was just a raider and fired and shot him. A complete accident, but it was a serious blow to the remaining McCarthys that were there. If he hadn't been killed, maybe O'Sullivan Bear would have been able to last a bit longer. And then there is another McCarthy Ray, Owen McCarthy Ray. Around the same time, his two sons, Donna and Fineen, also rebelled shortly after the Spanish arrived. They joined with O'Sullivan Bear and fought with him. The McCarthys in Duhallow, I think they kept quiet for most of the time, but then some of them joined with O'Neill and some of them joined with O'Sullivan Bear. So if you actually look in the granular details, you'll see lots of reports of various McCarthys. They're mainly unimportant ones, because the most important one was Florence McCarthy. He tried to stay on both sides, ended up getting arrested. He would stay in the Tower of London until 1640, where he wrote a lot of stuff. Cormac MacDermot from Muskerry actually survived the war, and then his son was given an English title. I think it's Lord Muskerry as well. And you'll find in the 1640s war his name a lot. And then I think one of their descendants ended up going to France in the 1690s after the Williamite War. Most of the other small McCarthys, a few survived, because if you look through the historical records, you'll see the odd General McCarthy in the English army, as well as a few in, say, Spanish and French armies. So it's complicated. All Irish lordships then were complicated, because you had lots of sons, lots of cousins, all kind of competing to get an advantage over each other to improve their own position. This was to the benefit of the English government ultimately in the end. Okay, so I think that's the McCarthys wrapped up. So let me have a sip of tea. The next question is something that I'm asking myself. I want to throw it out. The question of who owns history. I did a video, my last video was on the myth of Irish slavery. It's funny in that it got a huge amount of comments, massive amount of comments, but very, very few. Hello, Kira, thanks for joining. But very few views. And in the comments, it seemed to me that some people are very, very attached to myths, to legends, to stories they have grown up with. And it's almost as if they own them. They don't want to change their minds. They don't want to revise their views. They kind of want history to be good and bad, black and white, when really history is extremely complex. Everybody has a bit of a villain. Well, not everybody, many people have a bit of good. But even heroes can be very flawed. Indeed, what is a hero unless they are flawed? Like, I must admit, Hugh O'Neill is kind of a hero to me, but he was flawed. The fatal flaw was Kinsale, and perhaps more especially the decision to leave Ireland to go to Spain was a mistake. It was done kind of in a hurry. It's a flaw in a way. But in a way it creates a Shakespearean character. All heroes need to be flawed. But so just this question I have on my mind: who owns history? Who owns Irish history? Because I admit I get annoyed when I see people abusing Irish history. What I see is abusing Irish history, using it for political purposes, such as political purposes of the far right or something like that. Irish history has always been contentious. Like in the 1980s, there were it was a big academic division between revisionists and what you could call traditionalist historians, a lot of which came down to what was going on in Northern Ireland. I would tend to agree with both sides. I have this flaw that I tend to, I will read something and I can say, okay, this person is arguing well, he's right here, wrong here. So sometimes I say a plague on both sides, but sometimes I agree with both sides. And I think when you have academic historians arguing with each other, it's actually beneficial because you have better history. Because history is always changing because people are finding new documents or they're finding new ways to look at it. When you freeze history, and like the thing of Irish slavery, which is based on myths about Cromwell, essentially, it's based on stories that were created basically 100 or 200 years ago that have been corrected. And if you go into good serious scholarship, you can see like that these myths are wrong. But some people are so attached to them, they don't want to give up their myths. It's something that I find puzzling. Okay, another question is something some of my daughter's friends were asking me. What is my favorite period in history? And if anyone watching wants to write in and tell me what their favorite period of history and even why, I would like to know. I don't have a favorite period in Irish history. I have a few favorite periods. My most favorite would be the early modern period, basically, especially the 1590s, the 9 Years' War, but all of Elizabethan and some Cromwellian. That's my favorite part. After that, I like a lot of prehistory, especially the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and then some medieval. I don't like 18th century history. I don't know why. 18th and early 19th century history, with the exception of United Irishmen in 1798, I don't really like it. I find it kind of boring and staid for some reason. I have a friend who is a historian in 18th century Ireland, and he produces very interesting stuff and does very good research. But for me, like the Parliament in Ireland in the 1760s, 1770s, the Ireland under the penal laws, the growth of the ascendancy, I just find it very boring. I don't know why. maybe because nothing exciting happened until 1798. Um, and then, like, I like a lot of military history. I like some archaeology. Um, um, and what else? What else? Yeah, medieval history, okay. And modern history, I like, but once you hit 1970 to 1995, it's I like to read about it, but it's a very contentious period of history. I know I was in UCD in the 1980s and early 1990s, and basically, if you were studying history, you were told that history finished in 1970, which is when the trouble started. Uh, they said that's politics, which in a way was true. That was now it's history, but it's a very contentious history. What about anyone out there? Would anyone like to tell me what their favorite periods of history are? Okay. And if anyone has a question to ask, please ask away. Um, I should tell you now that I am in the middle of working on my next long video, which is going to be on Glendalough. And I imagine it'll be out at the weekend. I have it almost finished written as film, so put it together. But then, I'll wait a day or two to launch it. And on Wednesday, I will be doing another live stream. It'll be at 10 p.m. Irish time, the same as last week with my friends from Irish Medieval History and Clans and Dynasties. We will be discussing the Christianization of Ireland. So it'll be an interesting discussion. It was quite interesting last week, except I think it went on for almost 4 hours in the end. I had to give up. I think almost 1 in the morning. I said I have to go because I get up at 7 to bring my daughter to the school bus. So it will be a very interesting discussion. I hope. I hope it'll be a bit shorter. Okay. I was asked also last time I did this a question about the Bible in Irish, specifically the Bedell. I think that's how you pronounce it, Bedell or Beadle Bible. And I don't know much about Bibles or the production of Bibles, so I went to actually look this up. And I ended up going down a rabbit hole because I didn't know that at least there was no Catholic Bible as such, a complete Catholic Bible until I think the 1990s was the first full publication of a Catholic Bible. Uh, there were a couple of Protestant ones before then, and then some attempts, but never the full Bible, which I found funny because I remember many, many years ago when I did go to Mass, when everyone in Ireland went to Mass. I was living in Dublin near Buddhistan at the time, and Sunday morning, one of their masses would be in Irish, so that they had a full Irish-speaking Mass. And the same would happen in the Gaeltachts and in other places. So I imagine there was a Bible in Irish, but I only learned that it was only officially completed in 1990. Nowadays, you can go online and find various Bibles in Irish. Several of them are Protestant because there are differences between a Protestant Bible and a Catholic Bible. I think the Catholic Bible has more books. Since I went to Catholic school, we read stuff from the Gospels occasionally, but we didn't go into all the various books in the Old Testament. But as far as I know, in the Catholic Bible, there are more books than in the Protestant Bible. When Martin Luther came along, they threw out a few books for some reason. And the first Bibles in Irish were actually Protestant Bibles. One of the first ones was this one by Bedell. And then there were a couple of other ones along the years, because you have to remember it was only after Vatican II that the Catholic Mass changed from Latin to the vernacular, which in Ireland would be English or Irish. And then they would read more. You'd read the Gospel. You wouldn't. The Protestants placed much more emphasis on reading the Bible as opposed to In Catholic, it would be morality, religious stories, etc., etc. Emperor of Cork, or you're talking about your favorite periods. You stop at 1600s and step to verify, stick to 2500 BC to 1100s. Yeah, I'm similar enough. I'm similar enough. Um, oh, hi, Lucas. Long time. Cultura Inglesa. I think I left there well over 10 years ago. Nice to see you online. Nice to see you online, Lucas. I hope you're doing well in Brazil. I hope you're nice and warm and not getting rained on like we are here at the moment. Um, yeah, 2500 BC, basically Bronze Age to the medieval period. Yeah, I like those. Though again, when you're talking about what type of history you like some people they just like military history. Some people like women's history. You have labor history. You have lots of different types, uh, like constitutional history or legal history, which I admit I find a bit too dry. Um, it just I just find it a bit boring. I know it's important. You have constitutions and laws have a big impact on history and how things change, but they tend to be written about very dryly. Um, and then you have local history. You have so many types of history, and more and more emerge, which I think is very, very good. Um, and they, but I think it's important to write history well, to tell history well. Telling the story, creating a new story or changing story is very important. It's actually one of my problems with archaeology because I I like to read Archaeology Ireland, but I find a lot of archaeology reports, and I read a lot for my to make my videos. I find them they're trying to be over scientific, and it's almost like reading a report on something, and it can be very hard to read and very boring to say the least. Thanks, Lucas. It's great to hear from you too, Dennis. Uh, early Norman history is interesting, except you kind of have to write down the names as you read them because the names pop up and jump around a lot. People complain about Irish fighting among themselves, but the Normans are nuts because William wins the battle of, I was going to say the Boyne, but the other William. William wins the Battle of Hastings, conquers England. There's resistance to him. You have the scourging of the North and things like that. Then he settles down. Then he dies, and then suddenly it goes chaotic. I think one of his sons gets killed in a hunting accident. Most people think it was caused by another son, and then you have lots of fighting. You have a period called the Anarchy. Then I know the Empress ends up fighting. I think it's Henry II. So it's non-stop fighting, and the names change. And like William Marshall, who was very important, I think his son was also called William. But yes, just to answer the question, I will be doing videos because by chance, I was in London and I went to Temple Church to have a look without knowing it was connected to William Marshall or connected to the, what's that book called by Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code. So I've seen the effigy of William Marshall, so I'm going to do a story about him, especially because they're talking about, in this place, they talk about Marshall, they talk about the importance of what's it called? The chart, the Magna Carta. They talk about the Magna Carta. And on the one hand, they ignore Ireland because what applied in Ireland, what applied in England didn't really apply to Ireland. And secondly, William Marshall's wife was the daughter of Aoife and Strongbow, so she was Irish. His children were Irish. They could have played for Ireland, and this is ignored. They had big Irish possessions, so they were important people but they had a huge Irish connection, and this is neglected in this church. I'm thinking a bit about the hook in a way, the story, the narrative for this video, but it's going to be something to do with that. It's going to be something to do with that. Vinnie Murphy, shipbuilding the early medieval period. Yeah, it's not something you will get a lot of information on because there is Tim Severn's book, um, but it's funny because there isn't much information about it. So if you think of the story of St. Patrick was brought as a prisoner, as a slave from somewhere in Britain, somewhere I think in the northwest of Britain, the northwest coast, uh, and he ends up in Mayo. So he's brought by boat, by ship, and then he runs away. I can't remember how many years later, but several years he runs away, and he goes down to somewhere south of Dublin. I'm not sure if it's Waterford or Wexford, and he gets a boat, like a merchant ship, from there back to Roman territories. So, and there are also a considerable amount of Roman material turning up. I know some stuff was found in Newgrange, and there's a lot of Roman material in Ireland. And there's a big place in North County Dublin where they found a lot of Roman stuff. For a while, people were claiming that this was a Roman military encampment. It more than likely wasn't, but it could have been a big encampment for traders. So you have this seagoingness, this importance of the sea. Where I live in Valentia Island at that time, until the arrival of the Norse, I'm in Valentia, but you had the kingdom of Corcadevna. At that time, Corcadevna was what is now Corcadevna, the Dingle Peninsula, and the Iberra Peninsula. It was sort of a seagoing kingdom because you have the two peninsulas sticking out and they're close enough by sea. So boats were obviously important there. And then even if you look at the Vikings, the Unail in the north, in Ulster, they defeated the Vikings. They drove them out. One of the reasons that some historians say that the Unail in the north and the southern Unail were much weaker than Brian Boru was, because Brian Boru was able to draw on the Vikings, on the money created by trade, but also on their soldiers, and used their boats to go up and down the Shannon. But if you look at the annals, there's claims a few times of sea battles between Gaelic Irish and Norse. I know Strangford Lough is supposed to have been one. So you had this seagoingness, which then basically disappears. Then you have the Lord of the Isles, which is a mixture of Gaelic and Norse, and they operate galleys until probably the end of the 17th century, between Scotland and Ireland, and then these galleys would go along the northwest and the west coast of Ireland. O'Malley's brought down regularly soldiers from mercenaries, if you like, from Galway and Mayo into the Shannon Estuary, for example, to O'Connor Kerry. So you had this galley tradition. People talk about growing your whale in ships. She had basically galleys, which are, you could call them like descendants of the Norse galleys. And also at the same time, among the Old English, the Anglo-Normans, whatever you want to call them, many of them were traders. You had a huge amount of, say, from Limerick, from Dingle, from Cork, ships that would trade with Spain, with Portugal, with France. You had a lot of coming and going. One thing I find funny is that in the 15th and 16th century, you have a lot of Spanish and French and Basque fishermen off the coast of Ireland. There's not that many records of Irish fishermen. I presume there were some in small boats, but I'm not sure what happened to the Irish one. Yeah, as Emperor Cork says, they taxed the sea. So, for example, if you go to Ballinaskelligs in Kerry, there's a small castle there. That castle was more than likely built to get taxed. So that you have the Spanish fishermen, say, or French, they were catching a lot of herring, and they would need to salt these. So they would land them and put them in barrels with salt. And along would come, I know, Sullivan Lord or McCarthy Lord, and say, "That's fine, lads, but hand over some money." Um, in near Portmagee, there's Ringcara Castle. I made a video about that years ago. It's an old promontory fort, and then they built this castle at the entrance to it. But it looks an odd place to have a castle. But if you think about it, about 100 meters away from it, you can go down to the sea, and there's a little inlet. So it was more than likely used. It was by the McCrahan O'Sullivans, and they built it there to tax Spanish fishermen to make some money. But then, like with the downfall of Gaelic Ireland, the tradition of seagoing disappears. I know that in Dún Laoghaire there is the Maritime History Museum of Ireland, and there used to be a historian there, John de Courcy Ireland, and he would always, whenever he talked about Ireland's maritime tradition and how it had been neglected, etc. So there's a lot of research to be done into shipbuilding and stuff like that. I think it's a very, very interesting area, but it's one that I don't know that much about. I know a bit about it. Some people there are talking about Murphy's, etc. in West Cork. I know, for example, it's the O'Driscolls were another maritime lordship because they had castles in Castlehaven, which I think is now Castle Townsend, and a couple other places. And there would have been. Oh yeah, and then something else I remembered in the 1640s war, because someone has mentioned piracy. The Confederates, the Catholic Confederates, they had several ships who claimed to be Catholic Confederates. They were Irish privateers, and you can ask what is the difference between a privateer and a pirate, operating out of Dunkirk of all places and attacking the Parliamentarian shipping, which goes through. Most of them would probably have been from a Old English background, but they had a maritime tradition and they were able to turn it into warfare when necessary. Lucas, you're asking about the building of Stonehenge. That story changes a bit. They still talk about where the stones come from, and I can't remember the latest ones, but they would have been dragged either by boat or like there's been a lot of work done on it. I will look into that and come back to that question because otherwise I'll just end up saying stupid stuff. Emperor of Cork, I mentioned Tim Severn. Oh, that's very nice to have had him as a friend. I'm fairly sure he died a year or two ago, wasn't it? I remember, and this is showing my age, in the early 1980s, we were on holiday in Clare, and we went into, it wasn't Bunratty, it was a place that had like life-size replicas of a Crannog. There was a real castle near there, and I think a cashel. And there was also, I'm fairly sure there was his actual boat, the boat that he used in the Brendan voyage. But actually, yeah, his archive might be very interesting in terms of history about Irish shipbuilding, etc. If anyone knows where his boat is now, please tell us. His family haven't decided what to do with the archive. Yeah, I hope they preserve us. I hope it's kind of going, that's the place, that's the place, that's the place. I presume his St. Brendan boat is still there, but I wouldn't swear. I wouldn't swear. Now, just have a sip of tea. Now, I wanted to jump backwards in history now to the question of um, to the Tim Severin died 8 years ago. I thought it was much shorter, much shorter. Okay, I wanted to turn to the question of megalithic monuments. Now, when you talk about megalithic monuments, people sometimes they think about the Newgrange, the big passage tombs. But down here, near where I am, and more heading over to where Dennis is, sort of in South Kerry and southwest and West Cork, you have a huge amount of stone circles. They are a very specific type of stone circles, um, with a small number of stones, like 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 8. Um, but there are loads of them. Like there's one in Kenmare, though it's a bit too tame because it's right in the middle of the town and you have to pay into it. I don't like paying into a stone circle. It's a nice place. My favorite is Ura, which is in the Kerry part of Beara. It's by Loch Inchiquin. And if you go there after it rains, it looks amazing because there's a waterfall in the distance, and after it's rained a lot, the waterfall is very big. And there you have a small number of stones, like stones about a meter high, then you have one big one, so it's very picturesque. And then there's a lot of other ones. So like the question someone asked me, why are there so many of these stone circles in Munster, or more specifically in southwest Munster? Um, uh, in in a way, first of all, you have to point out that there are basically two areas of stone circles in Ireland. The first is this one I mentioned, and then the other one is in part of Ulster, Tyrone and Donegal especially. But there, the stone circles are much bigger, not much higher number of stones, but of smaller stones. Um, it's Beamore, I think, in Tyrone, which was found in a bog. There's hundreds of stones, but they're all very, very small. So it was two different cultures, if you like, building these stone circles. The ones in Ulster are so big, it's hard to know exactly what they were for. It's also true, the ones in Munster, but the ones in Munster have attracted a lot of attention. There's been quite a few excavations. Dennis, if you didn't see the waterfall, you must have been on a very, very special day, because especially recently, because the last few years have been so wet, like June, July, August have been very, very wet. I went in October 2 years ago, and the waterfall was huge. You must have been very, I don't know whether it's lucky or unlucky, but a very dry day. I wish we could have more days like that. So many of the Munster stone circles have either been excavations, or a lot of people have gone to 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 measure the alignments of them. And there's a lot of talk. There's even a kind of school of archaeology called astroarchaeology. Basically, it's a mixture between astronomy and and archaeology. Emperor of Cork, yeah, the waterfall it's at the back of, you can see it in some of my video, you can see it. Um, so there are people who were really into astronomy and archaeology, and they go and they measure the alignments, both of stone circles and stone rows. And my feeling is the same culture built both, and they had a number of reasons. One reason could have been for use as a calendar, especially a calendar that's much longer than the a yearly calendar. There's a stone row near me. It's in Kilrellig, up the mountains from Ballinaskelligs, and it's aligned with the lunar standstill, which is something like a 30-year or 36-year cycle. So the people who built these stone rows and stone circles, they had a very good knowledge of these lunar and astronomical movements or phenomena, and they were important to them. Another way would have been a calendar basically saying it's time of year where it's time to plant, it's a time of year where it's time to harvest, etc. Um, there would also probably have been a religious function, sort of some maybe was ceremonial, also for burial, because some stone circles have a big stone in the middle under which people have been found buried. Uh, a boulder burial is called. The one in Kenmare does, but not all do. Um, but it might have been used as a burial. Um, Also, many of these stone circles and these stone rows, because they're so visible, because they're made out of stone, and therefore have a very, very, very long life, they got used for different purposes by different peoples, by different cultures. So I think the stone rows and stone circles were built in the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age now in Ireland is becoming more and more associated with the Beaker people. However, the Beaker people, it's easy to create a name like that, where it's probably better to say Beaker peoples or Beaker cultures. Like in those days, even though there was international trade, if you like, um, for example, if you know Ross Castle in Killarney, um, quite near Ross Castle is Ross Island. On Ross Island, in the Bronze Age or the Copper Age, maybe better be called, there was a copper mine, and that copper mine was exporting copper. And I know they found materials using copper from there in England and perhaps in France. So you had a lot of coming. No, you had trade. You had important trade. And with trade will always come knowledge and exchange of cultures, maybe even new languages. But at the same time, I'm more and more uh, convinced that, like, you had separate mini cultures, or if you like, sort of, and in Munster, more specifically in Cork and Kerry, for some reason, we don't know why, there were people who were specialized, who had a very good knowledge of stones, of astronomy, etc., and they built these stones, stone circles, stone rows. Part of the reason could also have been for decoration, because there's something very beautiful, something very enigmatic about it. They probably had a combination of purposes, something symbolic, religious, a calendar, and also to show that, throughout history, people with money tend to build things to say that I'm here. Like most towns in Ireland have a Carnegie Library. There was a Carnegie millionaire American, I think, in the 19th century who invested lots of money in that. In the past, maybe there was a fashion in Cork and Kerry for building this sort of stuff. It's probably based on a combination of reasons, but in this specific area, part of Cork, part of Kerry, and a few other places, there was a culture existed building these. We don't know much about the culture, even the dates, because it's hard to get to date stone, and because many of these would have been reused by other cultures. So it's kind of a mystery of history, and in a way, I think that's why people like stone rows and stone circles, because there's a mystery with them, a mystery that I think you'll never be able to fully overcome. I know that every so often there are people who publish books saying that, oh, everything you need to know about stone circles. This is why they were there. They're there for this reason, for that reason. Um, Whereas I think you have to say, look, we think they were used for religion. We think they were used as a calendar. We think they were used in ritual. but we don't know. It was probably a mixture. I think it's important at times to admit what you don't know. Dennis, thanks for that name, Gortani Stone Circle. I don't know much about that. And Emperor of Sheep's Head near Bantry. It's a place I need to go. I need to go to that peninsula, which no one ever talks about. People talk about Dingle, they talk about Ivora, they talk about Beara, and then they stop. There's a few little peninsulas in Cork that they never get talked about. I don't know why. Emperor of Cork. I find it very interesting you mentioned quartz, because quartz is something in Irish history. It's connected to ritual and to religion, almost going back forever. For example, Newgrange, one of the big, when they restored Newgrange, they put the big white quartz wall. Now you can say, oh, that's a restoration, that's an invention, but there was quartz there. And if you go to several wedge tombs, you'll find some quartz stones, and they reckon some wedge stones were covered in stones, including quartz stones. Jump ahead to the early Christian period. I've been on Church Island. I've been on Ilan Church Island there's actually two Church Islands. One is between Valentia and Carsavine, and the other is in Lough Corrán behind Waterville. And Ilan Lough is between Portmagee and Valentia. All of these places were used as pilgrimages, places for Christian pilgrimage. And you find lots of quartz stones there. So somehow or other, there seemed to be a tradition of the pilgrim leaving a quartz stone, as well as I think sometimes when people built a shrine, especially a shrine with, say, the bones of a founder of a saint, they would put quartz there. But there was a tradition of putting quartz. Jump to the modern age, go into a modern Irish cemetery, and you will find lots of white quartz on graves. Maybe it's less used now, but it used to be very common. A grave would be covered with white stones, much of which would have been quartz. So I find very interesting that use of quartz. I don't think anyone has ever studied it, but it's something that it's runs, as I said, from Newgrange to the modern day, and there's not much you can say does that. Emperor of Cork, there's a line of quartz from Mallow to West Cork that has the world's rarest quartz. Okay, that I didn't know. The sandstone layers in Cork and Kerry produce some amazing agates. Okay, maybe that's why there's so much Cork down here, or quartz down here. I honestly don't know much about that geology. I've been at a very fascinating walk in Valentia with a geology professor from UCC, which was brilliant. And if you're ever down in Valentia, it's a book. It's a geology book, because you can see faults and the way the stones have changed or been changed in various ways over time. And when you have a professor showing you everything, it's really very interesting. Now, it's almost time to finish up. It basically is time to finish up because I started late due to YouTube's problems. I just wanted to, someone was asking me about podcasts or YouTube channels about Irish history. The other two YouTube channels about Irish history that I would recommend are the two I'll be doing the talk with on Wednesday. So it's Irish Medieval History and Clans and Dynasties. They're both very interesting, and you can find them on various platforms: YouTube, what's that one? TikTok, Instagram. They're quite good. Podcasts, I would mention the Irish History Podcast by Finn Dwyer, which is very good. He does a lot of stuff on medieval Ireland, modern Ireland. Early modern, not so much, and I'm not sure about prehistoric. Another very interesting podcast is the Irish Medieval History Podcast. It's an academic one. It's done by, I think she's a lecturer in history in Maynooth, and it has some very interesting stuff, say on Saint Bridget and Saint Patrick and other things to do with medieval Irish history, especially say from Saint Patrick running to sorry just before the Normans come in. Um, if you go to historyhub.ie, that's connected to UCD. That has a lot of good Irish history, good like lectures. They also have something I think is called the Tudor and Stuart Ireland Conference. So it's basically people giving papers, many of which are interesting, from the 16th, 17th, and early 18th century. That's quite good. There's any other Irish ones I can think of, or have I missed everything? Oh yeah, Amplified Archaeology. It's done by Neil Jackman, who runs Abarta Heritage, and he has a group called Tour where he provides very interesting travel guides and historical archaeological information. He has a very good podcast. It's called Amplify Archaeology. Um, and because he's an archaeologist, I think he knows many of the archaeologists. So he has stuff on Rathcrogan, on Glendalough, Tara, with archaeologists who worked there. His stuff on castles that's very interesting. So that's a very good one. And then um, other podcasts I like more to do with more general history. I listen to the rest of history sometimes. I don't agree with everything they say, but I think it's well done. It's interesting. I like something called History Rage, where they bring in historians to talk, to give out, to rant basically about certain misconceptions. It's quite good. Um, I think that's basically it. Then, a few other ones I just appear here and there, but those are some good pointers. If anyone has any other ones, please throw it into the chat. Emperor Cotterite. Okay, I'm going to look that up afterwards. Cotterite. Discovered in a single limestone quarry in Rock Forest. Okay, I have no idea where Rock Forest is. And nor do I know what Jack's World book is. It's a book about Sheep's Head, I presume. I'll look for that. Okay, it's getting late and I'm up early, so I will wrap things up now. Thanks a million for listening, and thanks for all the questions. It was great. Um, I'll be back on Wednesday with the two other guys, and at the weekend I will release a long video about Glendalough, and then I hope to do another of these next week, probably the same this Monday or Tuesday. Um, so thanks a million for listening in. Thanks for answering questions. Thanks, Emperor of Cork. Thanks, Dennis. Glad you enjoyed it. I thought it was great fun. The more people who come on and the more you comment, the more questions you ask, the better it goes, the better it is for me. I'm planning to keep doing these for a couple of months and see how they go. Um, Especially during the winter as it gets dark. It's pitch dark now and the wind is howling. So I will say good night, Slán, and we will talk soon, I hope. Okay? Bye bye.